shepherd, and I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
The word of the Lord. Our next reading, since you have the Bible in front of you, look it up. It's in Acts, which is in the Christian scriptures, toward the back, maybe 7/8 of the way through. Acts chapter 9, it's on page 956. Starting with verse 36, which is the little 36, the little numbers. Now there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, which means Dorcas, or gazelle. She was full of good works and acts of charity. In those days she fell sick and died, and when they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples, hearing that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him, entreating him, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter rose and went with them. And when he had come, they took him to the upper room. All the widows stood beside him, weeping, and showing coats and garments, which Dorcas made while she was with them. But Peter put them all outside, and knelt down and prayed. Then turning to the body, he said, "Tabitha, rise." And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and lifted her up. Then calling the saints and the widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And he stayed in Joppa for many days, with one Simon, a tanner. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
So does everyone know Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Fred Rogers often told a story about when he was a boy and would see scary things in the news. In one interview, he said in his characteristic slow and sure speech, "My mother would say to me, 'Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.' To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world." I think there's a lot of truth in what Mr. Rogers has said to us. And so I ask you, who are the helpers in our world? That's not rhetorical. Who are the helpers?
Well, the volunteer firemen that rushed into the Texas situation, and any volunteer.
All the volunteers, especially the firefighters and who rushed in to help in Waco.
Parents.
Parents
Yeah.
are helpers?
Yeah.
Sure. Who are the helpers?
For us, I think it's each other in this family, this church family.
Each other.
Friends.
Friends. Jenny.
Teachers.
Teachers. Yeah, they do help us. Who are the helpers?
Good nurses and doctors also.
Oh yeah. No, nurses and doctors, yeah.
I'm thinking like utility operators, electric, water, wastewater.
Sure. People who construct the things that bring us the means to live.
Counselors,
Yeah, counselors. Sure. What types of counselors are you thinking?
psychologists.
Yeah. Psychologists, therapists, the healing disciplines.
Student pastors?
I'm thinking simply, even sometimes strangers.
Well, I'm sorry.
I said, I'm thinking simply, even sometimes strangers.
Strangers, yes, strangers often come in times of need.
Animals.
Animals? Dogs? Yeah, oh yeah.
Feelings for people. Kids.
That's why we've seen a lot of the service animals lately.
Yeah.
Our kids.
Our kids.
EMTs and paramedics.
The EMTs and paramedics who rush in when everyone else is rushing away.
Anybody that finds himself in a position of a caregiver.
Caregivers. Volunteers. And I think we've heard some of these, but I'd like to ask maybe a little bit more specifically, and maybe take 10 seconds to think about this. Who are the helpers in your life? Maybe who have been helpers in your life, and what helpers do you have around right now? God? Sure. Yeah.
My sister.
Your sister.
My husband.
Your husband.
Close friends.
Close friends.
Co-workers.
Co-workers.
The women's Bible study.
The women's Bible study.
Anyone that helps you stand back and see the big picture.
Those people that help us get perspective. Sure.
The movie, the Bible, on TV.
Oh yeah, the series The Bible.
Huge way.
Our children.
Yeah.
Children.
Don't forget
Our
them.
children.
Our children. Who help us see things in sometimes a different light. And sometimes an innocent, such a pure light. That we often lose track of.
My doctors.
Our personal doctors, yeah. Your personal doctors. Sure. All right. Thank you. So in the scripture we just read from the book of Acts, the early church is in a very scary position. Just 2 chapters earlier, we hear the sad story about Stephen. At this time, he was one of the most important Christian leaders, and the scripture says he was, quote, full of grace and power and was doing great wonders. He was like their Billy Graham, maybe with more of a beard and skin tone a little less pasty. But it was a scary time for the church. One day when Stephen was preaching in the synagogue, up in the pulpit, a mob became angry about what he was saying, and they pulled him out of the pulpit, and they killed him in the street. It was a very scary time for the church. Who was there to help them? Then, in the next chapter, we read that officials were going door to door to arrest and imprison any Christians that they could find. In these acts of state-sponsored terrorism, men and women were dragged away from their families, and they didn't expect to see each other again. It was a very scary time for the church. Who could help them? Imagine what it must have been like for them. Maybe you don't have to imagine too hard. The anxiety, the stress, all these events, all this violence, though, wasn't just going on around them. It was directed toward them. All this early group of Christians had left was to hold on to each other. But then, because it just wasn't enough to have your leaders stoned in the streets and to have your members arrested in their homes, the pastor of one of these small groups of Christians, when they really needed her, just got sick and she died. She was called Tabitha by the Jewish believers and Dorcas by the Gentile converts. Both names translate to mean gazelle in the different languages. And her life, as we read, was just as beautiful as her name. Our scripture passage today told us that when she had died, she was surrounded by a group of widows that she had cared deeply for and had loved her in turn. It says that the people all had garments and clothing that Tabitha had made for them in their own times of need. I can imagine after she died, maybe one of the elders over in the corner praying. First Stephen, then the mob in the streets, and now our pastor. Come on, God, where are you? Who's going to help us? And I can see a couple of deacons, maybe in the back, in the other corner, sitting together talking about how they can take care of the community. One says, we don't have time for this. Let's just go outside and bury the body, then we'll all pack our bags and leave somewhere to go somewhere else. Then I can imagine the other deacon, maybe too scared of the police and the crowds outside to go outside herself or even think about bringing her whole congregation outside to bury a body and pray. God forbid someone sees us out there. Who's going to help us? And in the midst of this absolute mayhem, Peter, the apostle, was camped out in a house just one town over. And I imagine what this must have been like for him. It hasn't been too long in the scriptures, just a couple of months. He had seen the resurrected Jesus. He had sat down and eaten fish with the guy. And Jesus had told him specifically to take care of all the rest of the followers. And then, a month after that, Peter preached a sermon that converted thousands of followers all at once. Thousands. But since then, he's been arrested twice. He's seen his friends killed. And the city was on a manhunt for all those thousands of followers that he just converted. The question must have passed through his mind, am I responsible for all of this? Jesus told me to take care of all these people, and now look what's going on. What am I supposed to do? God, who is going to help me? Then all of a sudden, there's a knock on Peter's door. He opens it, and in the doorway, hunched over, sweaty and dusty, are two young men. Always look for the helpers. They're out of breath. It's our pastor, Tabitha. I've heard of her. She just died, and we ran right here. You've got to come with us. So Peter and the two left, and soon they arrived back at the house. Always look for the helpers. Peter made his way through the crowd and in the living room, and he went up to the room upstairs where the widows were still sitting with the body. Perhaps with a bit of nervousness, he asked, Could I have some time with the body? And of course, they all filed out and left Peter and Tabitha alone. I imagine Peter just on the brink of a caretaker breakdown. Oh God, what am I doing here? Tabitha, we need you here. What are they going to do without you? Please, Tabitha, arise. Always look for the helpers, because the scripture tells us that Tabitha did come back to life. And many, many people in the town believed in the story of Jesus because of the testimony of that small community. So maybe like the people outside in the town, you can see tragedy unfolding. And maybe it scares you. And you need to look to see people coming together to help each other. You need to look for those helpers. Maybe like Tabitha's community, you need to see someone running towards you. Look for your helpers. Maybe like Peter, you just don't know how you fit into this crazy world right now, and you need someone to come help you with an invitation to help. Look for your helpers. Because the Spirit acts in mysterious and wonderful ways, and we see the helpers. So as we move to pray our affirmation of faith, I invite you to meditate on the stone that rolled away when Jesus walked out of the tomb. I invite you to meditate on the stone that rolled away when the two boys met Peter at his house. I invite you to meditate on the stone that rolled away when the community got their pastor back, and many believed. Meditate on the stones that roll away and look for the helpers. Amen.
Amen.